Welcome back to the LoCo Experience Podcast, Seth Silvers.
Thank you.
And so I'm here today with Seth Silvers. This is our first video recorded edition of the LoCo Experience Podcast. And Seth is the founder and lead strategist at Story On Media and Marketing. And he's also the podfather in a lot of ways here in Fort Collins. He and I did our first podcast. Was that your first podcast as well when we did the first Small Business Storytellers?
Yeah, you're responsible for a lot.
Well, you're responsible for a lot.
I don't want to pump your head up too much, but yeah, I mean that was, I thought about doing a podcast, but I know you and we kind of talked about it for about a year, and then I think it's the first 10 episodes of the Small Business Storytellers where we kind of did it together.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun doing that.
The first 3 or 4 episodes were recorded in my old office in the America building with the loud exhaust fan, and
then we just
they never made it to publication.
No, they didn't. No, we sat on them for a long time and then decided to redo it.
Yeah,
but it was fun. It was a fun model, and then I think we did some co-interviews, and then we did some interviews where I did the interview, but then you kind of came in at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And then we kind of chit-chatted about it and kind of reflected.
I was like the expert. Or something.
Yeah, it was neat to have that perspective. It was a little bit cumbersome. Now I look back and it's like the more moving parts you have to a podcast, the harder it is to do it consistently. So I think at the end, we kind of both had to simplify it, but it was great. Got me into it.
Well, thanks for getting me into it, because definitely there wouldn't be a LoCo Experience podcast without our relationship back in those days in the early of the Small Business Storytellers. And I remember even back then, I was like, no, I want to do a really long thing. And you're like, dude, we got to do 30 minutes, 20 minutes max.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
But it's funny because now, so Small Business Storytellers, I think I'm about 100 episodes. It's been frequently infrequent. So I've kind of done some seasons of consistent shows, and then I would pause and, take a couple months off. And so right now I'm actually going to be going to a much more longer format starting next year. So I'm not going to publish anything until about January of next year, but I'm wanting to do more of a long form content for that show, just because I think some things have shifted and my desires shifted with it too. So
I didn't really plan what we're going to do and talk about. I know one thing we're going to talk about in this episode is that you recently got to interview Mark Cuban at a podcast festival of sorts, and I want to hear all about that whole weekend. I was tempted to go down there with you, but maybe we can even just talk about podcasting in general. I mean, you've become a bit of an outsourced specialist for people, helping people produce podcasts in the time since, and so I'm assuming that you've learned a lot about just how to produce, how to create, how to promote a podcast. And so can you take me through some of those lessons? And for people out there that are thinking about doing a podcast, how hard is it really?
Yeah, that's great. And, for context for some of the listeners or viewers, I mean, I started Story On, almost 8 years ago, I think. Maybe 7, I don't know. 7, 8 years ago, more than 5, less than 10. And that was when we first met, and the vision for what we wanted to do was to help small businesses market and grow with storytelling. I didn't realize how broad that was. It felt really niche for me. Also, business model wise, I had been a part of starting nonprofits, but I'd never started a business. And so it was just, I kind of have gotten I'm not a master of business, but I've gotten an MBA.
Here's what a margin is.
Yeah, over the last 7 years through trial and error. And so over the next 4 to 5 years, I just did a lot. I think I looked back and realized I had said no to maybe 2 projects. And that certainly wasn't because every project that came across our table was the right customer and the right budget. I had this scarcity, I have to take every business opportunity that comes. And I'm thankful for that because I learned a lot and kept on my feet.
Learn what you're good at, what you're not good at, probably.
Yeah, but it was exhausting because we were doing a lot of really neat projects in the storytelling and marketing space, and then we had our own podcast, the Small Business Storytellers, and that was good. That was fun. It was showing that we were. It was showing one that I did good work because the show was well produced and people liked it. So it was showing that we have the ability to create good stuff and tell good stories, and also it kind of shares our perspective with people. And so more people started coming to us, more and more of our clients started saying like, well, hey, that's great. Can you maybe do a podcast for us? And I don't know. I think the first one I charged like, oh yeah, for like $50 an episode, I'll do it.
You start tiling up your cost. You're like, it only cost me $120 an episode.
Yeah, something like that. And so then there was kind of a transition point about 2 years ago with a large client that I took on, and I didn't have the team to support it. And so I just tried doing everything. And so I pretty much half-assed 2 things instead of whole-assing 1 thing. And so I got like the client let that contract go. They fired me. And so that was really the point where it was like, okay, the thing that I'm the most happy about what we do is the podcasting. That's what's getting the most results. That's what's seeming to be helping the most people. And so, for the next year, I'm just gonna go all in on focusing on helping small businesses launch and grow podcasts.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the best business decisions I've ever made, of just like having that focus. And it was like immediately people knew who to refer me to, how I like, as opposed to like, oh, this is a marketing guy.
Yeah.
He does
one
everything.
Of 27 marketing people that we know that do everything, kind of.
Yeah. So that was a really helpful transition. And so the last like 2 years has just been focused on really building the processes and building the team around. I mean, I want to be one of the best and most respected like podcast, kind of indie podcast agencies in the country.
Yeah.
We're not there yet at all.
Sure.
But that's what we want to build.
Do you have some podcasts that you produce and help create right now that you can mention, or do you do it kind of ghost podcast creation kind of style?
Yeah, so a lot of them, my perspective on podcasting is unique and maybe becoming more popular, not necessarily because of me, but just because I think I see where the market's going. The most recent number I've heard is that there's over 5 million podcasts. I think Spotify said that last week. Maybe like pre-COVID, there was maybe around like 2 million.
Wow.
So like the industry as far as podcasts has over doubled in the last couple years.
Right.
I think that
how's the consumption in comparison?
The consumption is going up, not as fast as a pace. The consumption is definitely going up. But yeah, it's interesting. There's some interesting like how people are consuming podcasts depending on what age they are. Like there's some really interesting data there. But I think that as the market gets more saturated, the solution is to go more niche. To have like more
so that people can actually find.
Yeah, that they can find you, but that also like this show doesn't have to have millions and millions of downloads for it to be impactful, but also effective for you from a business decision.
Yeah.
So for us, like we talk to our clients, like you don't have to be the next Jordan Harbinger or the next Joe Rogan, where, they're making a ton of money off of sponsors because they have millions of downloads. I think that businesses can have podcasts that have even a few hundred downloads per episode. And if they're the right people,
totally,
and you're giving value to those people, then it makes sense. So we've kind of, I look at podcasting as more of like, for a lot of businesses, it's like an educational watering hole.
Yeah.
Where your audience is coming back each week to be inspired and educated, and they're going to get that information from somebody. So why not get it from you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So as a result, a lot of our shows they're not necessarily really well known, but they might be more well known in their industry.
Yeah.
We
really
are
tuned into that audience.
Yeah, we are doing some shows right now. Like 2 shows that we're onboarding is with a guy named Patrick Lencioni, which
he's pretty famous.
Yeah, I feel like if people are interested in leadership and are over the age of 40, they know who Patrick Lencioni is. He wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and so he has 2 shows that we're going to be taking over production for.
Oh wow.
And so that'll be like the most notable shows that we've worked on. But other than that, it's been mostly like really niche down, smaller industry shows.
Well, and it's like, I know like coaches and consultant types, and even LoCo Think Tank is a good example. The LoCo experience is not necessarily what LoCo Think Tank does, but if we get a member because they've stumbled across the LoCo Experience podcast, that person might pay $249 a month, or they might pay $999 a month, for our next level chapter memberships. And so one or two of those occasionally is enough for me to justify creating this podcast. Plus, I love the shit out of it.
Yeah, it's fun. And I like when we get new clients, I tell people, like, if you're looking to make an extra 10 grand in revenue or 20 grand or whatever that number is in the next 30 days, pick up your phone, call everybody you know, and sell them something.
Right.
Like, don't start a podcast. But if you're going to be doing what you're doing now in 2 to 3 years, like if you see this as a semi-long-term thing, that the business you're doing,
right,
and it's important to you to build an audience around your values and for your audience to come to you, even if it's slowly, for you to build an audience slowly that trusts you and that there's consistency with, then a podcast is a great tool for that.
Yeah.
Out of that 5 million podcasts I mentioned, there's we'll be generous and say there's 500,000 that have published in the last 30 days.
Oh,
so
wow.
even in that, like, active podcasts, way smaller.
Right.
And most people are still just starting podcasts and then quitting.
Oh, that makes me feel a whole lot better, because I've been pretty much once a week in it, except for a little time, like in the summer of 21, for almost 2 years now. Yeah,
and you're definitely in. I mean, you're in the. I don't know. There's some websites that give like scores for podcasts and stuff, but that definitely, that alone puts you in kind of another echelon of consistency with podcasts that most people just stop doing it.
Yeah,
it's very similar to, what blogging was in the early 2000s and different. Like there's always different iterations of things people want to start, and then they end up not continuing.
Fair enough. Well, and I've put serious consideration into hiring Storyon to produce this podcast, and probably would give more consideration to it now, even in the future, or as we expand and grow our audience, because I wanted to have these skills in-house. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to be able to outsource some things and things like that, but I don't like being kind of fully dependent on somebody else, and then I got to figure out how to do my own damn podcast.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, the ideal scenario is that you can manage it in-house. Yeah, you have so much more control. In some ways, that's probably going to be less expensive, and so I think there's definitely a benefit to being able to do it in-house.
Well, and I'm blessed to have Alma. She has a lot of talents and learns things quickly, and given that her regular job for LoCo Think Tank is really all of our digital assets and managing those things, and that she's become skilled at manipulating the files for the pod, and she's like, yeah, we can do video. I'll figure it out. I haven't done it before, but I will.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that it's a lot easier to launch a show than to grow a show. Like the growth side is something like over the next year, that's something that we are wanting to spend a lot more time thinking about.
Okay.
Because it's hard to grow a podcast.
Sure. Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah, you and I have had conversations, and I think you've seen some great traction too that a lot of people don't see. I think we've seen like the shows that we're producing that are doing the best downloads. Yeah. Wise, they are the most focused. So, one of those is a show for Christian men, and it's really focused on like masculinity and like what does it look like to what is faith-based masculinity look like, and having conversations around that. The show's not for everybody, but it's super, super niche, and like I know in my life, I know who to recommend that show to.
Mostly about putting women in their place, right?
I'm not going to answer that.
I'm just kidding.
No comment. But and I will say on behalf of my client that I'm not even mentioning. No, it's not about that. I will put that on the record.
Of course.
But
I know your wife.
Yeah.
So
and so it's an example of a show that is really, really niche down. Another show of ours that's doing really well is called Filipino on the Rise. And Crystal Fabella, she is multi-generation Filipina immigrant.
Okay.
And she talks on her show about specifically Filipino women. The perception is that you are being successful in America if you are a maid or if you are a nurse.
Wow.
And so her whole vision is we can do so much more than that.
Right.
Like we can
aim higher.
Yeah, aim higher. Let's break that glass ceiling. And so she interviews Filipino women that are doing incredible things.
That's awesome.
And she has this thriving community. And she's actually like fully, like her lifestyle is fully funded by the podcast and by,
awesome.
Membership site and different things. And So I think like it's really, really focused.
And if she like interview inspire like Filipino women that have succeeded and
I mean, she's interviewing
like
like Disney executives and like people, artists and people that have done really cool things, but also, people that might not be famous, but they've been inspirational in her life. And so I think as far like if a show isn't growing, it's because people aren't sharing it. And I think a lot of people forget that. Like if your numbers
I
are
don't share my
plateauing-
podcast very often either,
Yeah. And even it means other people aren't sharing it. Like there's probably especially over the last couple of years with the role podcasting has played in culture with self-education and different things. There's definitely been some episodes that I've came across. I've probably sent them to 10 people.
Right.
Being like, hey, I heard this. I think you'd like this. Or in conversations, oh, you just sparked this idea. I listened to this podcast. Here you go. That's a really important part of growing a podcast.
Sure.
And I think a lot of podcasters forget to realize like, oh, if our show isn't growing, that means people aren't sharing it. There could be a list of reasons of why that's not happening.
Yeah.
But like that data point of like, oh, people aren't sharing our show organically, like what's going on? And I think a lot of times it's not focused enough.
That's what I'm saying. And so that's about the niching. That's why those focused podcasts are really having more traction, is because it's so relevant to me in my specific situation.
Yeah. And like with my show, The Small Business Storytellers, when we started it, it was less common. There wasn't as many podcasts. So, cool. These guys have a business interview show. They're interviewing business owners.
Right.
That is less, it's less unique these days.
Yeah. There's only 4 million, or no, not 4 million, but 400,000 business related podcasts out there probably.
Yeah, exactly. And I've actually, I think the first podcast I ever listened to was with John Lee Dumas with Entrepreneur on Fire.
Oh yeah.
And I've actually gotten to know him over the last couple of years. And I mean, he's a machine. He's produced daily, 5-day a week podcasts for the last like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Almost 4,000 episodes.
Yeah.
And he's got a process down like to a T.
Right.
That was so unique 10 years ago, even 5 years ago it was, and he was really the first to the market. A lot of people have kind of replicated that in some ways, not to the same level of quality.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I began to realize, I'm getting reached out to a lot for people that want to be on my show, because as the podcast industry has grown, the guest booking agency and the PR side has grown.
I get 5 contacts a week from, it's like a investment banker or whatever in New York City sometimes. Yeah, I'm like, well, if he's coming to Colorado, look me up, but otherwise.
Yeah, they obviously like haven't looked and seen what your show's about.
Right.
And so I've let some people like that be on my show because mine isn't geographically driven, but I kind of looked back recently and realized, man, my show, I've done a lot of amazing interviews, but it's been a lot of like 25-minute interviews with business owners where it kind of just ends up being a pitch fest. Like, you kind of get to know them. You kind of have the same interview where you like get to know your story. Tell me about your business. What's unique? What's your ask? What's your offer? And I'm realizing with the stage that I'm at in business, what I'm interested in, like I'm very aware of what I don't know on my business journey for like where I want to go in the next 10 years for business. And I want to get answers to those questions. So for me, like I'm a lot more interested in sitting down with somebody for an hour and a half and learning about how they've taken advantage of tax strategies or how their pricing models have evolved as a business owner. Yeah. So I'm more recognizing now, like I want my podcast to reflect the business journey that I'm on. And so I'm exploring what does that look like? Yeah. Because I don't just want to have a podcast to have a podcast's sake anymore.
Fair enough.
And
well,
I think
and you can stay plenty busy
helping
other people create amazing podcasts.
Yeah.
And I think with your background in storytelling and all the studying that you've done about what makes an effective story and what helps people want to share things like that, like you can really add a lot of value to help. Because some schmo like me, I could just do a podcast and have, without really maybe a clear direction of what the intention of that podcast is and how to really try to create listenership and things like that.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, so, I mean, kind of going down the thread again of growth, like I think that your show has to be, I mean, there's got to be something unique about it. And it's got to be focused. And even when I made the business decision to focus on podcasting, because that was focused, people now knew how to refer me. People knew who to connect me with. Again, do people know who to share your podcast with and who it's for? And the other thing is, I do think that as the market gets more mature, advertising is going to become more important.
You're going to have to.
Yeah, and there's more tools now that are coming out to where it's almost like early Facebook ads days. I kind of think about it, where before Facebook ads, you had to spend ridiculous amounts of money on an advertising campaign.
Right.
Because, you had to hire an agency to design the billboards or design the flyers, and then somebody to distribute 100,000 coupons, and then you have to wait a couple weeks to see, do they come in? And then you're like, okay, did that work?
Yep.
So it's a huge time investment. Then Facebook ads came out, and it's like, okay, well, I want to spend
bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, like $50 reaching business owners in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Right.
And does it work? I think similarly now there's platforms that are coming out that give the ability where even if you wanted to advertise your show on other podcasts, which is one of the best ways to do it, you could do that with, even if you're only spending like $100 a month, you could be getting, an ad in front of 5,000 podcast listeners.
Wow.
So that technology hasn't really been in place until just recently. And so I think that some tools like that are going to be really,
we should talk more about that actually. I think that seems like a prudent way for me to promote, look for podcast listeners. Don't try to create podcast listeners out of magazine readers.
Yeah. And a lot of podcasters are really nervous to promote other shows on their show. Like, it seems counterproductive to promote another podcast on my podcast. Because well, then am I getting rid of my listeners?
Yeah.
And if your show sucks, then yes, you are.
I did have somebody. So I was on the Fort Collins Fellas. Do you know Patrick and Chris? Patrick Sukup. Yeah. And so I was one of I think I was their third or fourth guest or something like that. And somebody that had just moved to town heard about me and LoCo Think Tank on their show and started listening to the LoCo Experience. And Patrick, he did kind of say, I like the LoCo Experience better. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, but there's a lot of data that does show that that's actually one of the best ways to grow a podcast, because you're reaching listeners, and the reality is, if there's people in your audience that another show would actually help them out more, like, that's better for them.
Right.
And then similarly, there's probably some of your listeners on other shows that are passively listening to the show that would actively be listening to yours.
Yeah.
Jordan Harbinger is one of the top podcasters in the industry. He spends absurd amounts of money every month advertising his show.
Totally.
And he doesn't even need to, honestly. Like, he already has millions of downloads a month. He's making a lot of money.
Obviously, he feels like it's a smart investment, though.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that is that's really important to see, is like somebody who's at the top of the game. This is something that they still prioritize.
Thanks for recommending him to me. He's been become kind of on my regular rotation.
Yeah.
He's a little dorky sometimes, but and like he's pretend humble.
Yeah, he's interesting. I mean, and that's when you're really. It's always interesting when people when you're good at something.
Right.
How do you float that line between ego and confidence? But he was at the podcast conference I was just at.
Yeah.
And he usually is. He was there last year, and he's there interacting with people and going to say. And I think that also speaks highly of him and the industry. Is there's a lot of top dogs in the industry that are still very involved with the community.
Yeah.
They're not I don't need they're still very involved with the podcast community and learning and interacting with others. And I think that's respectable. It's always fun to see people who don't need to be there,
right?
But they understand the value of being there and connecting with others.
Speaking of people that don't need to be there, how about the Ben Shapiro thing?
That was interesting.
So let's set the stage a little bit better for folks. So this podcast conference was back in mid to late August.
Yeah, it was last week of August. It's called Podcast Movement. So it's the largest gathering of podcasters in the industry. So there's usually about 3,000 to 4,000 people that come.
Wow. And pretty much everybody's a podcaster. Maybe there's a few wannabes, but for the most part, they're already actively
everybody's
creating.
either a podcaster or industry.
Right.
So this conference is probably 70% podcaster, 30% industry.
And then that's people that sell podcasting software or better microphones.
Yeah, services or agencies or ad buyers or producers or different things. I kind of float in the middle of those. But I mean, I spent a lot of time meeting with potential ad buyers or podcast networks that are looking for podcasts to sign on or different things like that. And it's a good place to meet people like that.
And I'm imagining it as a little bit like a startup week kind of thing is for small business owners around here. It's kind of like that. There's different speakers and
it's like
breakouts.
During the day, there's tons and tons of breakouts. There's usually one keynote in the morning that, a session that everybody's in. And then there's, probably 50 or 60 breakouts during the day. And there's kind of usually different tracks from like beginner podcaster all the way up to like professional or industry side. And then in the evenings, at these events, all of the like big podcasting companies that are trying to woo us over to their platforms are just throwing massive parties for everybody.
Okay. And who is that? Like when we're
That's
talking
like
about
iHeartRadio.
Oh, okay.
Spotify /Wondery. Spotify bought Wondery, which Wondery was a private podcasting production studio in LA, and Spotify bought them for like $350 million.
Whoa.
A couple of years ago. Wondery has like a lot of the top shows.
Okay.
And I actually got to meet some of their show writer. I got to meet a bunch of people that work for Wondery this last conference.
Cool.
That was really interesting because I got to meet this awesome guy who's a business writer in the UK, and he's one of the writers for one of my favorite podcasts called Business Wars.
Okay.
So it was cool because it's like, I've listened to this show, and you're like the guy who's writing behind the host. But I mean, these are shows that have like 10, 15 staff members for one show.
Right.
Full time. And so like, for them, like if a show's doing 500,000 downloads a month,
right,
it's probably not economically viable.
Right.
Like they probably need to be doing way more than that to like fund it. But the quality of the shows is just on a whole nother level.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's a 2-day conference, 3-day conference?
It's
or 4-day conference? Okay.
Almost a week.
And it's down in Austin?
It was Dallas. Yeah, next year it's actually in Denver.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That'll make it easier for me to think about going.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always, I started going when I made the shift to podcasting. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to some of these industry events. So I've probably been to 4 podcasting conferences in the last year.
Oh, wow.
Year and a half or so.
Okay.
Just building relationships,
skills,
networking, learning, building skills. And it's been really, really valuable to get into that community.
Well, that's a good commercial. Is there another podcasting conference coming up then that I should be
So there's one in January, and the kind of 2 organizations are like Podcast Movement, and then there's PodFest.
Okay.
Podcast Movement's a little more produced, a little more industry focused.
Yeah.
Or probably has more resources for industry. PodFest, that one's in January in Orlando. That one, the percentage of podcasters over industry is a lot higher. And I've heard a lot of people say it's like almost like summer camp for podcasters.
Right.
So it's just that one.
Summer camp means spring break, I'm imagining.
Yeah, they a little bit of that. They feel different, but that one, I'll be at that one, and that one is great. And it's a little more connecting with other podcasters and learning what they're doing and what they're not doing and stuff.
Very cool. So, you had well, before we roll, let's talk about the Ben Shapiro thing at the Podcast Movement, because
I figured I had a
lot of people haven't.
I had 100% suspicion that you
I
would
didn't
bring
actually
this up.
pre-plan it, but when I forget, you were like everybody's welcome kind of thing, and all these big podcasters. So Ben Shapiro, host of a very popular conservative podcast, rolls into the Podcast Movement to basically drop by their booth, but he didn't have a ticket and he wasn't expected or something like that, right?
Yeah. So long story short, the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's company, their 6th largest podcasting network in the world. Ben Shapiro Show is the largest political podcast in the world.
Yeah.
I think he does 35 million downloads a month. just like slightly more than LoCo.
He's so hardworking.
Yeah. So
like that guy's always producing new content every day, and
it is his job, literally. But so Daily Wire sponsored Podcast Movement.
Okay.
I thought that was interesting. Podcasting as an industry generally, when you look at the stats, podcasting as an industry generally leans more left.
Yeah.
And there's actually a study that came out 3 to 4 months ago that it was the first ever study on podcasters. And it actually said that the representation of conservative podcasters, people creating the shows, is 18%.
Whoa.
So, and I mean, there's a lot of like moderates, but I think I think Democrats, I think it was like, I don't know, like 56 or something.
What percent libertarians like me?
Probably in the middle. I mean, probably
moderates,
probably like 25 or something. I don't know. But so it was really interesting because over the last couple of months, I've actually heard very liberal podcasters that I know saying, I'm liberal, but this is actually a problem. Like we need to,
the free speech
it's like not healthy for the other. It's not healthy for the industry.
Yeah, just that balance
to only have 18%, even though I don't believe anything that those people are saying. We need more of them. And I was like, wow, that takes a lot of balls for people to say on the other side.
Right.
So I thought it was interesting that Daily Wire was sponsoring this conference. I think they paid like $30,000 for a booth. But I also thought it was appropriate. It's like, if this is a podcast industry event, Disney needs to be there, Spotify needs to be there, Daily Wire needs to be there. Like these big networks need to be there. If we're wanting it to be kind of like well represented. And so I think on the second night of the conference, I saw two of my friends who run the conference. They're kind of the two top dogs. And I just said, hey, I'm sure everybody doesn't agree, but I'm glad that Daily Wire's here. I think, they weren't speaking, they were just sponsoring.
Yeah.
But I was like, I think for representation, I think it's important. And I said, I don't even agree with everything Daily Wire does or says.
Sure.
But I think it's good that they're here.
I agree with anything that anybody does or says.
And so they said, wow, thank you. That means a lot. We've been getting some pushback. We really appreciate it. So then the next morning they send out this tweet from Podcast Movement. And it's like the tweet gone around the world. And there's this like 5-tweet thread where they initially apologized because there was some individuals there that expressed publicly on the social medias that they felt pretty uncomfortable and felt like they were in harm's way because Daily Wire was in the room. They were threatened.
Yeah.
Because
Daily Wire I thought it was really focused on Ben himself.
Yeah, so Daily Wire was there, and then Ben showed up. Yeah. So sorry, that's a big piece of the story.
Ben's the evil little Jew.
Yeah. Well, you can't say things like that. But
well, he would say that.
Yeah, that's true. So Ben Shapiro was in town for another conference or like another event, and he dropped in for about 10 minutes, came to the booth, shook hands, took pictures with some people. People were really excited that he was there, and then he left, and that was it. So then somebody posted a picture online and said, how is this possible? I feel unsafe with this person in the room with me. And they were by about 300 feet away. And so then the next morning, Podcast Movement comes out and apologizes and says, we were wrong. We never should have taken the money. This is unacceptable. Kind of
in the
like
future, we'll think about who we associate ourselves with.
Yeah, kind of like it was a very typical cancel culture
response.
Tweet. So that blows up.
Right.
And like, this is actually the morning before I'm supposed to get on the keynote stage.
Oh,
and so I wake up and I'm like, oh goodness, I have to like, I kind of just compartmentalized. I was like,
Did you address it at all from that stage?
No.
Yeah.
No. It wasn't my place.
Yeah. Has Podcast Movement come out and said anything to follow up with that? Like, sorry, we were a bunch of.
Yeah. So the interesting thing was they got a lot of blowback from people on every side.
Yeah.
Like, very few people agreed with their apology. Most people that I talked to and that I saw interacting with this very much thought that it was an overreaction what they did. So I responded later that day. I just responded and kind of said, because I know them and I have some level of influence in that community. And so I felt like I also wanted the leaders to know, like, I think it's important for them to know, okay, if some leaders in our space are willing to, point out a different direction, then that's probably important. And so I pretty much just said, I've always really appreciated how inclusive Podcast Movement has been, because that's really one of their values and they've done a great job. But I kind of just mentioned, like, I feel like not letting somebody be here because they believe something different seems like the least inclusive thing I've seen you do. So then there's this whole thing where like that response I've never had anything go viral. That response went completely viral.
Oh, it did.
That tweet was seen by like over 500,000 people.
Oh shit.
I was quoted in Newsweek. I was quoted in the Dallas Morning News, of course, without my consent. And I've, got a bunch
of... Well, if you tweet it, you pretty much can quote it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really care. I just thought it was funny.
Yeah.
I was getting much more support messages than like hate messages, but I was even getting hate messages, which is weird.
From people that were pushing on you for pushing back against the way they responded, kind of.
So it was just this big piece. It was just really dramatic. And so
I didn't realize you were near the epicenter of this thing. I was just like,
yeah, it was weird.
I was just listening to Ben Shapiro on his podcast describing the scene and the fear that people rightfully had when a small Jewish man came into the room.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was really interesting. I don't want that situation to overshadow the event, but long story short, they a couple days later ended up removing the tweets and then kind of saying, hey, we're working on it. Like, we're trying to figure out what the appropriate response is. And then about 5 or 6 days ago, they actually apologized publicly to Ben Shapiro.
Oh, wow.
And very much took it back and said, we owe an apology to Ben Shapiro, which you do. They're a sponsor.
Yeah.
You can't just accept somebody's money and then, crap on them publicly like that. And so they initially said, like, we're really like working on it, and we're trying to figure out how we can have events where everybody feels respected and voices can be heard. So I think they're making the right moves, and Ben Shapiro actually responded to it and initially said, like, this is very rare for companies in America to cancel somebody and then actually like say like, hey, we were wrong.
Yeah.
So of course they've gotten pushback because of their apology. And so now I think at some point in the last 2 weeks, podcast movement has pissed everybody off on every side. I think, I still fully support, and I've been interacting with the owners of podcast movement, and
people make mistakes.
They do.
And
I know a lot of people are like, I'm never going again. And it's like, that's fine. That's your loss.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to miss out.
So tell me about the Mark Cuban interview and set the stage for that thing. If you're done talking about controversial episode.
I'm happy. And I do. The Ben Shapiro thing, it was eventful. It was sad. It's sad to see political things overshadow. It's sad to see things like that overshadow the value of something that's happening. And so I think that was a bummer part about the conference. Was I think a lot of people the last 2 days, they were just like looking at all this drama. But so one of the keynotes was with Mark Cuban and one of his co-founders for a content creation platform called Fireside. Her name is Fallon Fatemi.
Okay.
I've gotten to know Fallon over the last year and a half or so.
Okay.
And so she reached out to me about 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks before the event, and said, hey, I think you're going to be there. Do you want to moderate our keynote presentation, initially interview Mark Cuban and I? And I was like, let me think.
Hell to the yes.
Yeah. I had met him briefly with Fallon last year.
Okay.
They spoke last year at Podcast Movement, and that was kind of the public unveiling of their platform, Fireside.
Okay.
I've been an early creator on Fireside. It's a live content creation platform that's mobile first, and kind of it's in similar ways to like what platforms like Clubhouse was, like social audio, that whole space. Except for you can stream video, and they're really helping content creators.
So if we want to go to like a live stream and podcast follow-up thing, we might use Fireside here instead.
Yeah, Fireside could be great, and people that are listening can actually like jump on stage, the virtual stage, and ask you questions and different things. So they wanted me to interview them and also highlight the product and highlight why Fireside is really, really unique for content creators. And so it was really neat. We had about a 45-minute interview. And then we were also streaming it through my Fireside account onto, YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and LinkedIn.
Cool.
And there was also about 100, I think there's 100 or 200 people that were listening live on the Fireside platform. And so we actually brought 2 of those people up on stage, up onto like the Fireside stage.
Okay.
And so I initially knew that these people were there. And so I said, hey, we have a question from Fireside. And the tech team initially like switched the audio, and my friend Juliet from the Northeast was now virtually in this keynote with 2,000 people and asked her question to Mark. And so and then we alternated to an in-person question.
Video of her too, like on her Zoom or something?
We didn't do the video, but it could have been.
Yeah.
And so it was really unique because with this interview, we had my questions that I was guiding them through. We had in-person questions at the event, and then we also were bringing in questions from online. that those people were actually asking themselves. So it was really fun to like show how kind of this like merge of bringing like digital audiences and in-person audiences together.
Yeah.
And that was really fun.
So a few of us from the LoCo Next Level chapter that I'm a member of actually investigated bringing Jordan Peterson to Northern Colorado, and we haven't given up, but it's harder than it might have hoped for being. But if we did something like that, like at a Lincoln Center, and it wouldn't have to be Jordan Peterson, but if you could get a really high-end speaker, you could live stream that too.
Yeah.
With that technology.
Yeah, and like
and then have it forever.
Yeah. Live streaming has been around for a while. I think it's like really making podcasting
and have Q&A from people not there.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like making the content creation process more interactive. So it was fun. It was I was more nervous about the tech side than like the time with Mark Cuban.
Right.
But everything went pretty well. So it was great. I was really grateful for the opportunity, and it was fun to think about and prepare for. And I actually got to spend probably about 30 minutes with him before.
Oh, cool.
There was like tech problems that people were running around fixing. And so it like left Mark Cuban and I in the green room together for like 30 minutes to just sit there and chat. And that was great.
And how is Mark Cuban mano a mano?
He's great. I have a lot of respect for him. The first time I met him last summer there was like this private dinner at this podcast movement event last year.
Okay.
And I don't know, it started out as like, we're going to have this small dinner, and then it turned into this like kind of like who's who. And, they invited a bunch of like fancy people to come to this dinner. So everybody was dressed like real nice. It was like this nice place. And the person who was dressed the least nice was the one whose net worth is obviously bigger than everybody in the room combined, multiplied by 10. So yeah, it was funny. Like Mark Cuban walks in and, Under Armour shirt and jeans.
Right.
And he can, I think that's fine. But yeah, I think he's like pretty chill. I think like he's very personable, but also really focused. Like I've heard that he almost he very rarely takes meetings. Because it's more efficient for him to just like respond and text and email all of his different business owners.
Wow.
And so he'll go through hundreds and hundreds of emails in a day that he's personally responding to. So he's like very laser focused, but he also, with that, like, he was working on his phone, and then I started talking to him and like had no problem like putting his phone away, and like he was really present in that. And so I think I think that is, I've been really happy with the interactions that I've had with him. And he's obviously he's really sharp and but
I just shared with you right before we started this show that the LoCo experience today was going to be each of us eating 2 peaches while we're doing this show, and so I'm going to start mine now.
Sounds good.
My first one. I wanted to ask, you mentioned YouTube, and it sparked a thought. I was listening. Do you listen to Dark Horse podcast ever? Brett Weinstein.
No,
and
I've heard of it, but I haven't listened to it.
They're pretty cool. I like them. They were demonetized by YouTube for spreading COVID disinformation, misinformation during the pandemic, and they're still demonetized by YouTube and have been doing some other live streaming. I think they're at episode 140. They were the professors that Evergreen College thing that were being like hunted with bats and stuff because they've been around for a while, but YouTube is now having ads in the Dark Horse podcast on YouTube, even though it's demonetized. So that's kind of shenanigan like.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the Dark Horse podcast is not on YouTube anymore?
No, it's on YouTube, but it's been demonetized.
Okay, so Dark Horse, those creators can't
They don't get the money from the
YouTube,
ads.
but YouTube's getting.
But yeah, YouTube has in the last few weeks started placing ads again because apparently the content is okay to people that want to have ads. But
unfortunately, that's not surprising.
Yeah,
it's not new news.
YouTube and Google do what they want to do.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting and not that surprising, but it's I don't know, stuff like that's really interesting, and I think even. It does just like even with the I don't really want to go back into all the Ben Shapiro stuff, but I think like it's complicated conversations when you do start like integrating like okay, like YouTube is a private platform. Technically, Spotify's obviously gotten a lot of press with Joe Rogan and, employees going on strike and different things like that. Like,
right.
And that's where like podcasting is, I mean, it really is kind of like a free speech platform.
Sure.
Because like the way podcasting works is like this episode is uploaded to an RSS feed. Like this episode is not uploaded to Spotify. It's uploaded to an RSS feed. And then Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Overcast and all those things, they're initially tapping into the RSS feed. So anytime the RSS feed is updated, then it shoots to all these distributors. So theoretically, any of those individual distributors, based on their policies as private companies, most of them private companies, could decide we want the content on our platform. Yeah, and I personally think they have the right to do that. Do I think it's good? No. But do I think that I, as a private business owner, have the right to do things the way that I do? I do, and I know that you're a libertarian, so you believe that as well.
Sure.
And so, in that sense, it's like, yeah, it's annoying, but I kind of get it when, like, if YouTube makes this decision, it's stupid, but
they at least shouldn't be able to sell ads.
Yeah.
When they're demonetizing something.
Yeah, that's where it gets.
You
weird.
Can't have it both ways. That's kind of like, murdering a pregnant woman is double murder, but abortion up until delivery is fine.
Yeah, definitely.
You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, definitely is a double standard there for sure.
So I was thinking about Alex Berenson and Twitter while you were talking about that. Do you know that story?
I don't.
Oh yeah, you need to listen to Alex Berenson on Joe Rogan. He's been reinstated by Twitter.
Oh, I just heard him talking about this.
Yeah. And he was, also canceled for disinformation and stuff because he was saying the vaccines didn't stop the spread and you could still get infected and you could still transmit it. And then they knocked him off, and then they didn't let him back until just now, even though that has become obvious in the time since. Right. And but he's said on Joe's podcast that he's suing the Biden White House because he's got evidence that they basically instructed Twitter. They basically said, hey, why is Alex Berenson still have an account with you guys? After Twitter senior staff had said, we appreciate free speech here and your content. We've looked at it and it's fine. And then once Biden called him out, or the Biden White House called him out, then they were like, oh, you just had your first strike. Oh, second strike, third strike. Oh, you're off. Sorry. Yeah. And so anyway, he won reinstatement from them and discovery. And so he gets to depose a couple of Twitter executives and do discovery of evidence, any emails and things. So it's going to be an interesting. Their world hasn't gotten any less complicated at Twitter, we'll say.
Yeah, and it's interesting with stuff like that because they're at some point, like, these conversations get so subjective,
right?
To where, like, if I owned a media platform, would I be okay with content being on that platform that, we'll use an example, that was directly inciting violence?
Sure, of course not.
No, I would not.
All right.
The problem is, what kind of content directly incites violence? Like, that kind of becomes subjective. It's like, where is that line being drawn?
Right,
and that's where you have these lines that have been moving, where you have somebody that, 12 months ago, they were kicked off a platform for misinformation. But then now that information is not classified as misinformation. I know when all the Spotify stuff was happening with Joe Rogan, and you had like Neil Young who said, well, I'm not going to be on Spotify if Joe Rogan
right.
is. And Joe Rogan kind of responded, and he put out this video, and he pretty much just said, like, what is misinformation today might not be in a year. It might be, but just kind of saying, like, it's a little bit of a moving target, especially with some of these things that are like COVID, where like the information's changing so quickly and we're learning so quickly.
Yep.
And so that's the hard thing, is when the target for these platforms are moving.
Yep.
And why I think podcasting is actually still great in it, because you can kind of subscribe to a user.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily need the platforms to engage with that user. And that's why I think we've seen some people that have maybe gotten kicked off platforms where they've, found a lot of love in the podcasting space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you brought up Rogan and Spotify and that scandal, and thinking about people sharing things, his subscribers went up 2 million during that 6-week period when he was being canceled, and so it didn't work very good. And I don't know if that's because he's Joe Rogan, or whatever, and the uncancelable, right? Or is that because it was a reason to share, right? And I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think oftentimes cancel culture backfires.
Yeah. It seems like, it kind of goes back to that line of all publicity is good publicity.
Yeah. And I do think I actually, with the podcast movement situation, I think it's super important. One, that like we need to be able to be in the same room with people that believe very different things than us. And I think that's like a basic, well, it's not a basic human skill, but I'd like it to be. I think it's important for us to develop that skill and be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I also think we need to be willing to learn from people that actually learn to empathize with people that are very different than us. So like there's two individuals that this situation kind of like stemmed from, where they expressed their opinion that they felt unsafe. And since then they actually wrote these very lengthy articles describing like their experience with podcast movement over the last couple of years. These individuals are trans. And so they've actually worked with podcast movement to try and make a more inclusive culture and different things. And then
they responded to this controversy as well and said why they didn't feel safe.
They did. Yeah. And they actually, and honestly, it was absolutely disgusting how much like hate and abusive.
See, I don't like that either.
I know. And so I actually reached out to them and I said, hey, I know we're probably on the different sides politically.
Yeah.
But I said, I read your article. It did like challenge my way of thinking a little bit. And I also just said, I apologize because I think it's disgusting, the like hate that you got. And it's even more disgusting that the hate that you got is coming from people that chances are probably align with more political ideologies on my side than on your side.
Right.
So it's like,
yeah.
And actually, I wasn't really even expecting a response. I just wanted them to know, like, I appreciate that you put your opinion out there, and I, consumed your experience, your opinion, and that was valuable for me. Like, it was time well spent. And they actually they just said, wow, like, thank you. Like, this is very different than what the responses we've been getting.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing is like, I think in situations like that, and even, in cancel culture, like we just need to, I don't know how all the time, but I think it's like really important for us to try to understand what other people are going through, even if we think it's wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a hard balance.
So how long do we have again? I can't remember when your deadline is this morning.
I have to be out of here in like 30, 40 minutes.
30, 40 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, like
so
10, 15, 10, 20.
I'm kind of was imagining to myself, like, and I didn't realize kind of the extent to which you're kind of an industry insider at this point, really. There's probably...
It's happened that way. It's been surprising to me. I feel really grateful. Like, I feel like in the last 18 months of just being like, I want to get plugged into this community and, fully commit to going into this community. It's been, I don't know what words to call it, but I feel like there's been some favor,
some real momentum.
Yeah.
And so if things worked out just like you hope they do over the next, say, 3 years, what would that mean for you as a podcaster, as a producer of podcasts, as a business owner, entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few things. I want to be managing production wise. Like, I want our team to be producing over 100 shows.
Okay.
For clients. Right now we're at about 20.
Oh.
So, that's substantial growth there.
I'm sure it's way harder to get from 0 to 20 than it is to get from 20 to 100.
I hope you're right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that we've been building our processes from scratch, and so I feel like we've been building our team and our processes so that like we're not going to have to like rewrite we're not going to have to rewrite the book every 20 clients or something. Like,
it
the process now
steadily.
So I think in some ways, like, adding new clients on now is much easier than adding new clients on a year ago.
I would have to think so.
Mostly because a year ago I just did everything.
Well, and you didn't have credibility to speak of.
Right.
There really, and now there's even in the last, because of that explosion in podcasts, I have to think that the number of agencies, if you will, that do your kind of work, helping people create podcast content and make it work.
It's growing. Yeah, there's more of them. A lot of people, people don't really like editing podcasts.
Right.
So
that's why we don't.
Yeah. So, it's also, there's a space where a lot of people get into production and then leave.
Yeah.
Because they realize they want to do other things. And that's totally fine. For me, that looks like an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity to keep doing this and doing it hopefully really well. So on the production side, we definitely want to scale that and do really, really well with being able to launch and manage and grow shows. It's also really important for me to, and I kind of realized this actually talking with a mutual friend of ours, Jennifer Lewis, who I just ran into like an hour ago at a coffee shop.
Really?
Actually. But a couple months ago, we were talking and like kind of like really thinking about like I've had clarity on maybe where I want to be like 5 to 10 years from now. But then how do we reverse engineer that to like, are we putting things into motion now to do that?
Yeah.
So for me, like down the road, it's always been important for me. Like I want Story On to have some original content and original shows that are financially successful, that are doing really well, that are bigger shows.
Sure.
So I was challenged when talking with Jennifer because it was like, okay, well, what are we doing now to see that happen?
Right.
Like I can't just want to, 5 years from now have some big shows.
Right.
But then that means we have to launch some shows.
Right.
So I think over the next couple of years, probably 2 to 3 shows a year that like will be like Story On original podcasts and original shows that I'll be launching. More intentional
you don't think
than
that's
just
small business storytellers, I guess.
I think it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Small business storytellers definitely could be it.
Yeah.
And I'm putting a lot of thought into like what this next iteration of it is.
Yeah.
I think I will probably rebrand it.
Yeah.
So I think it'll probably be somewhat of a new show.
Yeah.
Or new skin on an old show or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that's something that over the next year or two we're working on some ideas and also working on having like the margin and the capital to be able to say like, hey, it makes sense business wise and thought leadership wise in the industry. Like we should be putting out our own stories, not just telling our clients stories.
Yeah.
And so that's challenging, but also exciting for me is to think about us having the opportunity to be able to tell some of our stories. And I think the business side it's not an end to a means. Like I care about the business, but I also think like the agency side, I want to scale that so that we can tell stories that I feel passionate about and so that we can give in ways that I feel passionate about. So in that sense, I want to scale the agency so that we have the resources to be able to get stories out there. Yes, that are our clients, but also that I want to get out there.
Yeah.
Maybe that looks like us launching an original show. Maybe that looks like me meeting, Kurt from 3 years ago who has a great show concept and us saying like, you know what, we think this is really important. Here's $20,000 to get this show off the ground. And I like the idea of being able to have the capital and the agency to be able to like help stories get out there and help shows get off the ground.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my mind's at for the next couple of years.
Yeah. And you think that the podcast industry will continue to grow? Maybe the pace of new podcast creation is going to slow because it's hard, to make it work financially, and people just get bored and tired, and we're not locked in our houses anymore.
I definitely am not worried about it.
Yeah.
So another interesting stat that I heard recently from the head of podcasting at YouTube, I think it was 50 million active YouTube channels that are creating content. So 50 million channels that in the last 30 to 40 days have added new content. And we said before about 500,000 active podcasts.
Right.
So that's 100 to 1 difference. That. So in that sense, you look at it like 10 years ago, there was a handful, like literally 5 or less channels on YouTube that had over 1 million subscribers.
Wow.
Now there's something like 20,000.
Wow.
So you see, like, I think people for the last decade have been saying like, oh, YouTube's at its peak. Like how much bigger, like how many more creators can there be? I just think that the industry is going to continue to grow. I think podcasting is a great place for people to be able to build an audience.
Yeah.
I think we need to get more creative with the monetizing. and
right.
like figuring out like how do you actually support your podcast. And I think there's innovation in that happening right now.
And for those of us that don't have a membership to sell or executive coaching, is Elizabeth's show live? Is that public? Can we talk about that? Because I was really honored by that.
Yeah, so we're one of the shows that we can definitely talk about it. It's not live yet. I think it'll be live in I think launch date is in 3 weeks.
Okay.
From whatever today is. I think early September
13th or something.
But yeah, that show will be called the Business Transition Roadmap.
Okay.
And I mean, you know this, and some of your listeners that have listened to the episode where she was on here know this, but she for the last 20 or 30 years, Elizabeth has been helping business owners transition, most often from maybe a business owner to
the founder to the next generation, or something like that.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not as much like a business owner selling and exiting as much as it is like a business staying private and making that transition healthy.
Yeah, and maybe it's not to family, but it's to a leadership team that buys them out and whatever. How's that work?
Yeah, and so I mean,
she was a great podcast guest.
Yeah, her knowledge is wild.
Elizabeth Ledoux, we should mention as well.
Yeah, and their website is the transitionstrategist.com, I believe.
Strategists, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. One of the two.
I think it is, strategists. So they, they'll work with you for several months to build a transition plan that is often 2 to 10 years long.
Yeah.
So they're working with their clients over the long haul to effectively make this transition. And so we're launching a show for her.
Yeah.
We always recommend that one of the first few episodes be kind of focused on your story to build trust. And so I was like, well, Kurt already did that. You already had her on the show and you did an amazing job. So we're going to be actually dropping that LoCo Think Tank episode into her feed.
Cool.
So actually,
are you going to put a link to the LoCo Experience podcast? So
I am. And actually after this interview, I'm going home into my studio and I'm recording an intro on that podcast that says, hey, go listen to Kurt's podcast episode. And then,
why would they listen to it on mine? Because it's going to be on yours, right?
So they'll listen to the episode on her feed,
right?
But then we'll initially say, "This is a great podcast."
Oh yeah,
go check out.
Thanks for
LoCo
loaning
Experience.
us this footage, LoCo Experience. Guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for that.
So yeah, that's a fun kind of crossover. And overall, the podcasting industry is super, super collaborative.
Yeah.
There's not many jerks in the industry,
right?
And I feel like almost every industry, you're the jerks.
Yeah,
And I feel like in general, it's a really collaborative industry. It's a very common growth tool is to do these kind of episode swaps or
sure.
You and I have the same size of show, so let's, you promote my show and I promote my show. And that's really how a lot of people get to the kind of 1,000 to 2,000 downloads per episode mark is through this very collaborative feel.
Yeah.
And then people can start kind of monetizing, whether it's through affiliate offers or sponsorships or different things like that.
Yeah. Now, with my podcast, we're in person only.
Yeah.
Is that a big handicap? Because do you do the storytellers through Zoom?
So we
format?
So we do it through a platform called Riverside.
Okay.
There's several platforms that are pretty much high definition versions of Zoom.
Okay.
So it's a lot higher quality for recording virtually.
But it's still a virtual thing. You're not in the same room as somebody.
Yeah, it's a virtual thing. We're not in the same room. Which was a transition for sure, but it was one that I think was the right move for us.
For you, I think for sure. I mean, the thing about LoCo Think Tank and the LoCo Experience podcast is I don't have anything to sell to anybody outside of Northern Colorado, at least right
which,
now.
I don't think you should.
Right.
So that's the thing,
well, I think we will someday,
Yeah, but typically the way that sponsorship works in the podcasting space is it's a cost per 1,000 impressions.
Right,
and that's pretty much all of marketing. So, in podcasting, the average is around $25.
Okay.
So if 1,000 people listen to this episode and an advertiser comes to you and they say, we want to add in that, then you would say, okay, it's $25 because you're going to get 1,000 people.
Gotcha.
So $25 is not much.
No.
You're getting paid.
Even at your $50 per episode thing from way back when, you'd have to have 2,000 downloads to justify it.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's no margin, there's no taxes, there's no profit, all that stuff.
Right.
So it really doesn't often work. I think when you get into more niche shows,
yep,
you have the ability to not charge based off of the impressions, but charge based off of the value for your audience. So for you,
right,
you have, a couple hundred downloads per episode, but those people are likely here.
Right.
They're in Fort Collins.
Yep.
So is it valuable for
like for somebody I'm thinking like an estate planner or something to be on the Elizabeth show.
It could also be like Crazy Carl's. Like you could get Crazy Carl's to say like,
right.
And now there's the technology. Who do you host through?
Buzzsprout.
Okay, so Buzzsprout
they can let you update the ads and put it on everything.
Yeah, so Buzzsprout has a tool called Dynamic Content.
Mm-hmm.
I love their team. They're great. Their team. They're actually, the owners are Christians. They're in Jacksonville. They're a really, really cool team of people.
Cool.
Which there's plenty of cool people that are not Christians also, but I was just excited.
If you were.
I was excited to just have that connection when I got to meet them.
Yeah.
But they have a tool called like Dynamic Content. You initially could record up to a 5-minute spot and then put it at the beginning of all of your episodes.
Yeah.
So probably half of your traffic is on your back library.
Sure.
And so if you sell an ad on this episode that's like in the episode,
right,
that ad is naturally going to become outdated pretty quick.
Right.
As opposed to being, if Crazy Carl's pays you $1,000
right.
to talk about some special offer that they have.
Yeah.
And then you can say, all right, we're going to play this in front of all of our episodes.
Yep. For 20 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whatever.
So I think there's some tools like that where you can like go more niche and more local where, it's a lot more valuable for somebody locally to say, okay, this is a local podcast, a local audience.
Yeah.
Typically podcast listeners are more educated, higher earning potential. They're listening because they want to learn. And so there's going to be a different reception to ads in podcasts than there are when you're watching a YouTube video and you're just getting interrupted by random
Right. Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. Actually, sometimes when I'm listening to ads, I'm like, I might try those, Yeah. I want to try that Vivo Barefoot.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think there's, again, like having like a more focused podcast gives you a little bit more unique opportunity. One of the shows that we're getting ready to bring into our docket is it's actually a show interviewing people in the NFL community, primarily NFL women.
Okay.
And on the back end of this show, these hosts, they actually they've built like a private social platform for NFL wives.
Oh.
So obviously like, they probably don't spend a lot of their time on Instagram. They're probably always getting reached out on those platforms and stuff. So this is like a private little community where they can connect with other NFL wives.
Interesting.
And so they also produce a magazine. They're like our clients, they work really closely with the NFL.
Yeah.
And so they also produce a magazine that has articles and resources in it that goes to every NFL current and former family. So again, the number
Super
of that
niche audience.
the number is not that big.
Right.
But the audience is pretty darn focused.
Right.
And there's a lot of advertisers that you would think would want access to that audience
and
exposure, and they're going to pay more because that audience is more focused. So I think you see that trend in podcasting and in other forms of media too, where it's like the more focused the audience, the more valuable the audience is.
So that's a very specific kind of case where you know exactly who the audience is.
Right.
But one of the things that's frustrating to me, aside from the fact that I can know people are in the U.S. or whatever and that they're on Apple, but otherwise I have no idea who those people are that are downloading and listening to the LoCo experience. Yeah,
so this is where I think NFTs are coming into play. That might feel very left field to start talking about cryptocurrency now.
No, I think
I think there's one of our clients and a friend of mine, they've built a platform called uncut.fm.
Okay.
And it's an NFT membership platform for content creators. Part of the reason they built their platform is because you don't know who your fans are.
Yeah.
You know that you have an audience, but there's like a difference between an audience and a community.
Sure.
And so
that's totally what we've been talking about is how do we build a community around the LoCo experience? Like, what does that even look like? Yeah. So, I mean, first off, you need to know their name. Right. Like you need to know who they are, and you don't get that information. You just get a download. Yeah. And so there's some opportunities
I think that the technology behind NFTs, I think, is the future of like membership based, like digital memberships. I think will be done through NFTs. An example of this, there's one podcaster named Brian Fanzo. He has a cryptocurrency podcast. Every episode he shares a password.
Okay.
And in that password he says, hey, go to our website and claim the NFT, claim this episode's free NFT to show me that you're listening.
Yeah.
So you go in, the password might be peaches.
Right.
And so you go in and you type in peaches. He's not sharing that password anywhere else.
Right.
But then, he has 15 people that go and they put in that password. They get an NFT. That NFT then, gives them access to certain valuable, that's where
Peaches?
then, maybe he sends them a peach.
Right.
But the more important thing with that is he knows who they are.
Yeah.
So you could even say like, maybe you create an online, a quick online training on business or something. And you say, hey, if you're listening to this episode, go to our studio on uncut.fm, enter the password Kurt, or enter Kurt loves peaches.
Right.
And I do that and I get an NFT, and that NFT gives me authenticated access to certain perks online. So similar in aspects to Patreon.
Yeah.
Patreon, you don't own anything.
Right.
With the NFT and different things, you actually own, like your members own it, and there's a lot more ownership pieces to it.
Initially, when I think about NFTs, I'm thinking about like the digital art kind of stuff, but it does, just because it's a token, it doesn't even have to be artsy. It's just a tool.
Right. Yeah. So like on uncut.fm, they have a really cool platform where you can create your own NFTs or digital pieces of art.
Yeah.
You can determine the price. You can determine if they're free or if they're password protected. And then the people that claim those and that get those tokens, you actually can communicate with them.
Oh, through that even?
Through that.
It's not like they give you your email or whatever.
Well, you do get their email.
Okay.
You get their email.
Yeah.
But you don't have to email them. You communicate with them directly through that platform.
Really?
So
if you go look at your Kurt's Face LoCo experience token that we sent you for being a guest or whatever, then there's like a messaging element to that interface as well.
Yeah, there's a messaging element. So
interesting.
It's still early. We're still seeing like some of the use cases for it. One of the original shows that we're launching is called the Minted Podcast.
Okay.
It's actually about how it's going to be documenting the journey of content creators starting to use NFTs. It's actually launching this week, which is fun.
Is that you're doing that for some other creator?
So we're doing that as Story On, and then it's like sponsored by uncut.fm. So it's kind of like powered by them.
Yeah.
And they're the platform that we recommend to do it. So it's really, really interesting with that. So like with the Minted Podcast, we will actually I'm going to be minting different NFTs. And, to start, I'm going to mint 50 NFTs, and it's going to be called, I'm going to be inviting people to join the Minted Creator community. And we're initially saying, if you are a content creator and you're interested in talking about NFTs and how this technology connects to creators, go on. It's going to be really low cost. It'll be like $10.
Yeah.
They buy that, and then that community that they're a part of online, they can now communicate with other people in the community. I can communicate with them.
Well, it's like anybody who's got that token can have that message or whatever.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah, exactly. And what's
the interface like? Is it just like an email or lines of code, or is it like
No, it's super simple. The interface is great. But yeah, I mean, as far as your communicate, it's kind of similar to like a chat room or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
But if I want to go to that community and say, hey, we're thinking about launching this new show or this new initiative, I can have that community vote on it or different things. So you're kind of really
very
creating
interactive.
a community around the show. And so I think that's where there's some interesting opportunities is through the like NFTs. And I think the main thing for content creators is it's going to make it a lot easier to turn your audience into a community.
Yeah.
Your community is not going to matter if you're not giving value to the community. Sure. So there is a sense of accountability that comes as a creator where it's like, okay, well, are we just going to like create this show and hope that people show up? Or are we going to be like thinking about how can we create this community that's really valuable? You think about if Joe Rogan would have done that 10 years ago.
Right.
where he had, 1,000 people in that first year that said, hey, we want to be a part of your inside community.
Right.
That'd be pretty valuable nowadays to be a part of that community. And you could sell access to that community. You could sell your token.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting. There's a lot of potential use cases. I think in the next year, we're going to see a lot of creators that start doing things like that, where they say, thanks so much for listening. If you want to be a part of the LoCo, podcast community, and you want to get first access. Also, if you want to help me, maybe I take one question from the LoCo community for my future, for my next episode. So if you want to be a part of the interviews, then do this. Or you could even do it to where the people that are listening live right now, maybe you have to have an NFT in order to get in the door for that. So part of being in that community is you get to actually be live with us, and you get to ask a question live. And Fireside's working on that technology as well.
Or how Shapiro's doing it with Daily Wire, or with Jordan Peterson. Like, it's like, here, this is the free podcast now, but if you're a Daily Wire member, then you can have the last half hour of this interview.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, because of and this kind of comes a little bit full circle to some of the like free speech conversations and platform agnostic stuff. NFTs are platform agnostic. So like if you join our, the minted creator community, and you get that $10 NFT because you want to, be a part of this exclusive community of content creators. And let's just say, I don't think it's going to happen. Let's just say Uncut.fm, the platform that we do this all through, they don't make it.
Right.
They shut their doors. You still have that token because that token's on the blockchain.
Uh-huh.
I still know who has my token because it's all through wallet addresses.
Oh, interesting.
So I could actually still send you other NFTs that give you access to other platforms or other value.
This last platform didn't work out, but we got this new platform. Here's your door key.
Yeah, as opposed to, you're on Facebook. You say something Facebook doesn't like.
Lost you.
You're gone.
I'm gone.
You can't access those people. You don't have their email addresses.
Yeah.
Patreon, you have 1,000 patrons. Okay, they go, you're gone. Like if the platform shuts down or you don't want to go there anymore, then you're pretty limited. So again, we're still really early, but the technology behind NFTs and cryptocurrency, it really is platform agnostic community building, which I think is really interesting.
Have you ever had any posts removed or anything like that, Mr. Silvers?
So no, but this is really interesting you asked this. I just took down an episode for the first time in my life.
Oh.
A previous episode. I had, and I will actually gladly share names of the company.
Sure.
I interviewed a company named the CEO of a company named Spimby.
Okay.
They create they're kind of, I look at them as kind of like an IKEA style, like kids playhouse.
Okay.
Like it's kind of like modular. You can kind of customize your own. Really cool designs.
Yeah.
And they're a certified B Corporation and seemed really legit.
Okay.
They're in the Netherlands or something. So I had their owner on and he seemed great. Posted the episode and I got a barrage of Instagram comments, emails.
Okay.
Over like a 6-month period, like almost every week I was getting some kind of people saying like, how can you have this
platform
exactly? And them saying like, we ordered our product a year ago. We haven't gotten anything.
Oh my.
They blocked us. We can't comment on their posts. We can't get in contact with them.
Oh my.
Probably comments from 30 different people that all were like very much saying like,
this guy's a fraudster.
We ordered it. We never got anything in return and we can't get a refund. We can't even get in contact with their customer support. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I was like, I'm just going to take this down.
Yeah.
So I like removed all the posts and told those people, I said, hey, thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah.
Like,
interesting.
We didn't know this. So I haven't had anything removed or censored, but that was an interesting case of where I actually posted something that then looking back on it was like, I should have done my homework more. And that was not like, that probably wasn't the right business to put out there.
What do you think the ratio of actual censorship to self-censorship is if you imagine the psyches and norms? I feel like the interesting thing, even though there's a lot of censorship happening, I suspect like that's the tip of the iceberg. Like 95% of it is self-censorship where people are scared to say what they would like to express.
Yeah. I don't know. That's hard to know. It's hard to pick a number on that.
Yeah.
But
Do you feel like you've self-censored? Like you had a thought, you wanted to share it, and then you feared the consequences too much?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't I'm sure that will happen more if I have more of an audience. I think some of that might be self-censorship. I think some of it might be awareness and also knowing, like, I try and think of like, what's the goal here? So you brought up like, okay, did I mention anything about the Ben Shapiro stuff when I was on stage with Mark Cuban?
Right.
It's like, what's the goal here? I'm walking onto the keynote stage. I feel very blessed and thankful for this opportunity. I know that this opportunity's, building credibility for our business. And what's the goal? What's the purpose of me going on? It's like, okay, the goal of me going on stage is to do an incredible job, hopefully, interviewing Mark Cuban, to get Mark and Fallon, the speakers, to understand what they want to share and what their goal is for that time, and hopefully to get that across, and also to be aware of the audience and what they want to hear. And also knowing, I know Dan, I know Jared, who run Podcast Movement, what do they want this time to be?
Right.
Like, those are my goals. This is not the time for me to stand up and say, I have a personal statement to make about the tweet that came out an hour ago. That would be...
I was thinking something more like, well, that was a shitstorm caused by that tweet, huh, guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I could have. But so I think even online, it's like, if I build a show or a platform that is very based around like me sharing my personal beliefs in that setting, then like that's something I'll be probably thinking a lot more about and being like, okay, like I'm going to be more transparent about what I think.
Yeah.
I personally just I don't care a ton about putting my personal beliefs out into the world. I'm more than happy to talk about my personal beliefs with people in my circle.
Yeah.
And I enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a hard conversation to have, but there's definitely been times where I'm like frustrated or something and I don't want to say something. And even like, at Podcast Movement, when that tweet came out, I was with one of my clients and he was pissed about it.
Right.
He's like, I'm going to make a tweet about this. And I was like, maybe you should wait. And he's like, why? I was like, maybe just wait till the afternoon until you're less pissed about it. And he's like, no, I got to send it now. And I was like, well, why do you want to send it now? He's like, because people are talking about it now and more people will react to it. I was like, so you're saying that the main reason that you want to post now is so that people react to it? He's like, huh. And then he posted and then he got blocked by a bunch of people. So I think that like in that,
you can lead a horse to water. But.
Yeah, there's definitely times that like I want to say stuff online or I disagree with things that are going on a bunch of different facets, and I've been like, yeah, no, this isn't the time. Or
so, who are your main podcasts? Like, who captures a lot of your listening time? Are you really a whole bunch of ones, but just a little bit of each kind of thing? Or what's your on your regular rotation?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good question. I feel like there's kind of a variety. People like Joe Rogan and like Jordan Harbinger. I definitely don't listen to everything that they do, but I appreciate them as interviewers, and they bring on really interesting people.
Sure.
And so those are two shows where
I cherry pick them both.
Yeah, probably once a month I'll go in and cherry pick and maybe pick an episode or two. There's two shows that are focused on like the creator economy. Mm-hmm. They mostly lean towards like YouTube creators, but they talk about podcasters some, and they talk about the business side behind it. One is the Colin and Samir show, and one is called the Iced Coffee Hour, with a guy named Graham Stephan, who's kind of made his name on YouTube by doing good financial stuff.
Okay.
So those are some that I listen to. I've really been liking a show called Business Movers.
Okay.
It's a Wondery show. The host is this guy named Lindsey Graham. I actually got to have cocktails with like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, I've heard your voice on something. It's because he has a bunch of big podcasts. So that's a really fun one where he goes into like moments of conflict with like prominent business owners, and they just do such a good job of telling those stories.
Yeah. What was the name of it again?
It's called Business Movers.
Okay.
Trying to think of some others. I also I'm trying to get better about listening to more and more of our client shows.
Sure.
So like right now we have 6 shows that are pre-production. Especially the first 10 episodes of those shows. I'm very involved with like critiquing those shows. And
so will you listen to it in whole and then like take notes and edit some things out and stuff like that? Or like how does that work? How does that like for those that edit their shows and stuff?
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so me personally, I do not listen to every show that's put out by our company. Up to this point now, like some weeks that's 15 or 20 shows.
Right.
Some weeks it's not, but I can't do that mentally.
Right. Well, just time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have.
Yeah. So I'm starting to get better about like having my team bring shows that they want me to review and getting that review process. I've even thought about like finding a college kid that I can pay like $10 a show and be like, hey, here's this review, here's this critique form, like listen to this podcast. Like we've explored unique ideas like that.
Yeah.
When we're launching a show, we kind of launch in like an accelerator format. So we'll do a 12-week program. You're
hitting it kind of hard.
Launch a show. We'll do coaching to hopefully help you understand how to be a good podcast host. And then we'll produce the first 10 episodes. Those first 10 episodes, I am listening to those personally, and I am providing really specific critique on those first ones. Then once it goes past that, it kind of goes more to our team. On average, we probably have 2 different team members that are listening to an entire episode. We're not cutting out likes, ahs.
Okay.
I think that makes it seem too much like TV, which seems produced.
Right.
Podcasts should be conversational. So you can't remove all of those, but we're definitely like looking for, is there moments where things are too repetitive or where we need to take them out? Mm-hmm. So we are not doing audio engineering. That is very different than like we're editing. We're doing, chopping, maybe some rearranging, maybe some removing repetition. We're doing really professional intros, professional outros, things like that. Yeah. And then we're focusing a lot on creating like the promotional content on the back end. So micro content for, Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok and
a 30-minute podcast into 20 or at least 10 content pieces kind of or whatever.
Yeah. So that's where a lot of our focus is in like the post-production content.
Yep.
We prefer for our podcast to be much more like conversational and not unedited, but, seeming like a professional take on an authentic conversation.
Yeah. You didn't mention Lex Friedman. Have you been listening to his podcast at all?
I haven't. I
was turned on to him last January, and he's kind of my new favorite. He's a little.
I'm gonna look up my list.
He's a little deeper than Rogan in some ways. A little more philosophical.
Yeah, I honestly I don't think I've listened to his show. I've heard his name a lot, and I've heard about him a lot.
He's a Russian-Ukrainian by birth, MIT scientist guy, robot builder, That's AI engineer.
So I mean, some other ones on there, like one show, I actually have it's a private podcast. This is my first one. It's called Good Morning Podcasters.
Interesting.
It's about a 10-minute daily show. I probably listen to 3 out of the 5 days.
Okay.
And that's kind of on the podcast industry. It's by a friend of mine, Tanner Campbell, and that's like a good industry show. One show that I've really liked is I generally really like Logan Paul's podcast, Impulsive.
Interesting.
The Paul brothers are very controversial people, but they're people that like they're young people that I'm just like really intrigued by their business journey.
Right.
And so that's another one I kind of cherry pick. I've also recently there's some like financial shows that I really like. So like one of those is the Stacking Benjamin show. And then another one called The Table with Anthony O'Neill. Anthony O'Neill actually used to be with Ramsey Solutions.
Oh, okay.
Then about a year ago, he transitioned out and he started his own show, just talking about like, financial education and strategies and different things like that. So,
have you listened to Hot Ones before?
I've never listened to it. I've watched it on YouTube. So yeah, I've heard that it's a show. Like I haven't in the last I haven't since pre-COVID.
Yeah.
But I used to. I think that show concept is awesome.
I think it's pretty funny. Yeah, I don't know how to equate. I had a Peaches here when I watched the Peaches this morning. I was like, oh, this could be like my thing. I always feed my guests peaches, and I was like, that makes no sense.
Yeah, and he's I think it's Sean Evans. Maybe
that sounds right.
He's just a brilliant interviewer.
He really is.
He does such a good job, and like it's such a brilliant concept for listeners that don't know. Like they have. Over the interview, it's usually 20 or 30 minutes. There's 10 hot wings that are progressively hotter and hotter and hotter.
Increasing
and
intensity,
the hottest one is like 10,000 times the hotness of Tabasco or something crazy.
Usually, yeah.
And so it's really interesting because as the interview goes on, these celebrities, like all of their guards are down.
Right.
Like they're getting more and more vulnerable. And as they're like dying, like they want to punch him. It's not just like, tell me about your childhood. He brings like these crazy in-depth questions. Like, 10 years ago, you were on this interview with this person and you said this, which caused this article, and they responded to this. Tell me about that. Like, I'm here dying. Like, and it's so funny. But you look at like Gordon Ramsay, that episode is amazing.
Okay.
Because you have Gordon Ramsay just F-bombing everything because he's like
so
always eating.
Fucking hot. Why would you make
so like there's like Gordon Ramsay. I know one with Paul Rudd is hilarious. There's a couple different ones. But yeah, hot ones. I think that show concept is great. I've mostly watched it on YouTube though.
So I know we got to wrap this up pretty quick here. If there was one question that you really wouldn't want me to ask you, what question would that be?
I've never been asked that question. I feel like a pretty open book. Like I actually remember coming in here as like, you know, I know there's probably a few things we'll talk about, but it kind of thinking like this is like one setting, and obviously we have a good friendship as well. So it's like
I wouldn't set you up for a fall.
Yeah, but also I feel pretty like open to, you know, whether we go down the route of talking about like personal challenges we're dealing with that might not be so pretty, or business ones or whatever. It's like I think that would like I feel pretty open to answering almost any question.
When I have to compliment you when you were on the show last time, which was probably about 18 months ago. You were kind of in a more tentative space and very retrospective about your business journey, and you didn't have 20 clients. I know that.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad. I'm proud of you for really, you know, finding that space and really cultivating it in a way that seems like you're just on the beginning of some serious momentum. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yeah, timing wise, that would have been a more tentative space. And I think I always heard people say like the riches are in the niches.
Right.
It was like, oh, that's good for everybody else. Like I'm going to serve everybody. And so I feel I think one of the best decisions that we made was just saying like, all right, there's a lot of things we could be doing. We're going to focus. And this is going to be the one thing we do.
Yeah. You can do anything, but you can't do everything.
It's true. Yeah. All these like cheesy slogans that are actually true.
Yeah. And sometimes they're diametrically opposed to each other, but they're still both true. I don't know how that works, but
yeah.
Well, I love you, brother. Thanks for being on the show again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Godspeed to your pursuit. Oh, we were going to talk about, do you have a podcast event coming up in Denver?
Yeah, I think we're going to do it like, I think it's probably going to be early November now.
Okay.
But yeah, we're going to do like a Colorado podcaster meetup kind of thing.
And how would people like find out about that? And also how can people find you and Story On and subscribe to your thingies and whatever?
Yeah, probably. I mean, my name is Seth Silvers on everything, I think. So like any social platforms. A good place. I mean, our website is successwithstories.com.
Okay.
So that's a good.
And you'll have information about this gathering there at least.
Yeah, I think
and probably on your Facebook page.
Yeah, and I think I'll post about it on social. I think if people. Yeah, if you're specifically interested in going, then just reach out to me personally, and I'll make sure you have the details of that.
Yeah.
But
and if you want to ride share with Kurt, I'll be going down there probably as long as I can.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. Like we're gonna probably do 2 a year.
Okay.
For kind of the Colorado podcast community, and you know we're getting sponsors and different things, so that it's actually
be interested in sponsoring that.
We're just kind of like I want to do it well. I mean, you and I, we've both done events. We've both done really good events before, and I think you and I are like, if we're going to do an event, let's make it a memorable experience.
I've done some pretty lame events before, too. So when are you going to come back to LoCo Think Tank membership? It feels like...
Maybe that's the question.
That's the question you didn't want me to ask.
I don't know. Maybe we can talk about that offline. Okay. So I think the next year it would be interesting.
Yeah.
I just joined a podcast industry mastermind.
Oh, cool.
It's serving a very different purpose than LoCo Think Tank. But yeah, we should talk about that.
All right, sounds good. Hey, Seth, love you. We're gonna let you go.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.